All right, welcome to the January 11th, 2017 meeting for the Express Technical Committee. First meeting of our year, and also first since our holiday end-of-year break kind of thing. Last we had a meeting, it was prior to the Node.js Interactive. Certainly good seeing the people there and meeting everybody that myself and Rand had met there. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the second agenda item here, which is talking about Multer 2.0 alpha. And so I will let Linus take it over.
Yeah, cool. So just to give some quick background, I have been thinking about the next major version of Multer for quite some time, and I started doing some work a few months ago that actually led to me publishing some alpha releases of a new sort of API that I think is more simplified to use. So the title of that pull request and also really what it is about is to switch to stream-based API, and it goes away from the before notion of having different storage engines that for example could store to disk or just to memory, or there is also a third-party one called Multer S3 which store to S3 and instead only provide the user with a stream for each file, a readable stream. I think the benefits are that you don't need any special integration to do with third-party services. For example, S3 is quite common to want to upload files to S3. This makes it easier to just use the normal S3 library instead of using a specific Multer adapter. And also stream is it's common in Node.js in the ecosystem. Most APIs accept them, and it's also very easy to turn a stream into either a file on disk or a buffer, whereas it's not always as easy to do it the other way around. And we also have had requests for being able to modify the files as they come in, and similar things that will be solved by this being a stream. So I guess the background for bringing it up and wanting to talk about it on this meeting is to see if we think that the API is good and how we want to move forward, and generally how we do with alphas of or pre-releases, I guess, or when we have a new major release of one of the packages in the Express ecosystem that is not Express itself.
Yeah, I definitely think that, at least the whole thing of stream-based APIs is cool because recently or semi-recently, a few months ago, the multi-party package was donated into Express. So for those who aren't, just some background is like Multer is built on top of the busboy package for parsing multi-part form data, and it basically wraps it up and provides it as a Express.js middleware. Multi-party is essentially another thing that's similar on the line of around busboy. Not an actual direct Express.js middleware. So, but multi-party, I'm sure just like busboy though, does provide, since they're lower level, provides access to the part streams as streams rather than trying to store them in places. And I know that Multer has gone the way of storing it somewhere, typically just because it's usually, at first, I believe the idea was that it was simpler, but as Linus has pointed out, it does, of course, one of those things that can grow over time and become the churn of the entire module starts becoming, adapting these different storage layers. So, kind of like a couple different thoughts just from like Express.js kind of point of view in my mind, is that, just like Express itself used to have all that, you can almost think about it kind of like how Express had a lot of middleware just as part of it pre 4.0, and then 4.0 they were just split out into different middlewares. In some respects, I'm not saying this is completely analogous, but in some respects, the storage engines in Multer is kind of similar in that, whether I'm saying it's not exact. It might not be exactly analogous because I'm not sure how pluggable the storage engines were from the outside versus middleware, which were pluggable just the same. But it is in the way that certainly, even if it's pluggable, people are going to immediately go towards what's built in, and they're certainly going to desire to have what their needs are built in, just because it just seems better and it seems more first classy. Obviously, there are advantages of that, which is that it's kind of like the all batteries included. You just pull down the package and say, yes, I just want to stream it up to S3, or yeah, I want to stream it to disk, or just put it in my memory, thanks. Things like that. Obviously, the disadvantages are that, either that people are going to want everything, that all of their use cases to be first class, or the things that are first class right now, I'm sure there are many, many ways you can improve them. For example, just buffering up the memory. Some people are probably going to want to limit the maximum size that it can take in memory. Some people are going to want to have them see each other so they can limit the maximum size across all the blobs. So they can say, each blob can only be 5 megs, but also only 100 megs of blobs total. There's all kinds of different spins on it. So just from my thoughts on stuff like that is, certainly, pluggableness is awesome. Spinning them off into separate modules. Obviously, we'd have to think about, like, if we do that, and I know you're turning it into Streams APIs, and like, of course, a question goes, well, what happens to all the work that was put into those storage modules that are in there? Is one thing I'm thinking about. So I don't know if you thought about that or not, but if it become either they just get discarded, or the API is pluggable in some way, so you could repackage those up as modules, and then of course where those modules would even live on GitHub would be another question if we had decided to do that. So I don't know if you've gone down that road on your thought path or not, but at the very least, certainly changing to a streaming API is certainly fitting with some of the philosophy that I've had with Express, which is that, if there's a way to make it generic, so hopefully everybody's use case can be solved, even though the people have to write code and not just, change options, then it's a lot better for being a core piece of the technology stack. A good example of that I can even just think off my head is that in the body parser module, for example, just as a easy one, is that, it gave you an easy way to filter the request based on the content type. Well, I mean, it still needed to have a content type. It needed to make sense, so it could, like, match its little expression kind of stuff. But we still had all kinds of people just needing various different things. So it eventually just became just like a straight up function. So people could just provide their own filter, basically. So that way it's just like, I don't know, if what's built in doesn't fit you, just make it with the function. And then of course from there we can be evaluated. Should we just remove the other part and just leave the function only, kind of thing? Similar to like having the middleware function, so in Express. But I mean, that's just some rambling thoughts.
No, absolutely. I think it was actually quite interesting to see that with the Multer S3 package, we got a lot of pull requests. I mean, basically, I think most of the issues in pull requests were about adding more options that you could that the AVS SDK accepted for setting various settings on your file to S3. And I was thinking actually, how would you, if you wanted to build Multer S3 for now this new Multer, it wouldn't. I think really the only thing it did, because that module was still very small, it just took the file and called the Amazon API with it. Potentially a function that takes like the rec.files object and uploads all the files to S3 could still be interesting to have. But I think it's also one of the benefits now is that we don't need to add all of these options for everyone's use case, because now they will be able to just pass whatever options they want to the Amazon S3 API directly. But I think that certainly we could build something that would just take all the files that were uploaded and send them all up to S3. I think that could be possibly interesting, at least exploring if it would be of use, even though I think that many people would opt to just doing it yourself. It's basically a for loop and I guess collecting all the promises or callbacks in the end.
Right. Because that's the thing with like, what should we do? Because you always, one of the other balances is like, you have to balance like what you're interested in versus not. So like, for example, you said you did a lot of the S3 stuff. I assume it's because you were interested in making it work with S3. But I'm sure someone will come around and be like, I want to make it automatically upload to, and I'm just pulling out my hat because I'm not, I'm not familiar with the technology, but like, say like some Azure blob storage, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, cool. Maybe someone makes a pull request, but then people have questions about it. There's lots of people I'm sure that don't, will report issues, but unless you're familiar with it and like have access to even test things on it, it starts to become like a burden, right? So like sometimes pluggable is nice because it lets the people who, can really find like their essentially niche. It's like, oh, I use Multer and I like it, but I know a lot about like some kind of Azure blob storage, say. So I can like find my niche by having this module that glues the two together for everybody else to use and myself. And I know all about them, so I can actually like support this module, because that can a lot of times make a kitchen sink kind of module kind of hard to support too. I mean, Express Session, for all its good pros and cons, I mean, it has, having the store parts be pluggable at least has certainly helped a lot with that, because I mean, just, we listed them on our README just because there were so many and to make them a little more discoverable. But still, I mean, just think about if all of those were built into the core. First of all, installing Express Session would probably install like a bajillion dependencies you didn't even use. Besides probably just end up where there'd probably be like thousands of issues like constantly. And the thing is obviously, issues would exist no matter where it lived. It's just, you kind of like can think of it as like spreading it around to also just not only to different people, but like really it's like spreading it to the people who are actually interested in that particular like use case, rather than just a one size fits all, and then like where nothing's really great, and everything's just kind of okay, maybe just like kind of functions, you end up in that kind of you end up in the kind of functions, I guess, land. A lot of those times, especially when it's open source and like it's just volunteered, it's not like a company is like, driving this either, which makes it harder. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the other, I just realized another question you asked was about releasing a new major version of something that's in Express. So, and that's more of a policy thing, question rather than a technical question.
Yeah.
And so really there's a couple different aspects of the modules in Express. So you have essentially you either have a module that, and I'm not going to say Express directly, but really just you have, I would say, two classifications of modules. A module where one of its dependents, like something that depends on it, is also part of Express, and one in which there's nothing else in Express that depends on it, as in you can kind of think about it as an edge module, right? Like it's purely there for other people to use, not for even anything within Express itself to piggyback off of using. I would say edge modules where nothing in Express uses are pretty much free to do as they feel like. Like they can, you can release major versions all at once. There's really no coordination to do because that's really the thing, is coordination. Typically when it's a non-edge module, as in it's a module that other parts of Express or Express org stuff depends on, then it's kind of like by ear, really, because ideally we don't want to get in a situation where even within our own modules, like we release module A depends on module B, and then module B makes a major version, but A didn't make a major version with it, and that major version of B actually affected module A, so it had to bump its major, kind of thing. Also, having that discussion to figure out if it matters or not is useful. That way they can just be bumped together, because maybe like person, and obviously, like I said, it's very much by ear, but I mean, so I don't really have too much because, as it kind of comes up, we'll kind of like figure it out. But certainly edge modules, which I'm pretty sure Multer is, I'm 100% sure pretty much. So like it really doesn't even matter. The only thing I would say, I guess, is that so recently Rand had actually put a lot of those modules and embedded their docs into the Express.js.com. So under like resources middleware, there's a little list of them, and Multer is one of those because it's a pretty big middleware, really useful for people to know about. And pretty much that just means just probably like there's a process in the Express.js.com repo to update these things. So really at that point, the only real coordination we even really need to do with Multer specifically is just either make a pull request just running that, importing the new Multer README of the new like major version into it, or just pinging Rand to go do it. And that's really it for at least this point, for at least, what is probably semi-necessary. I mean, obviously there's a lot of good things to have, right? Like things that I like to shoot for. And so, it's awesome to see the modules in Express shoot for is at least having some kind of explanation for how people will migrate from one major version to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. Writing together a migration guide would be really good.
Right.
I would almost like to say, necessary to ease the transition.
Yeah.
I will also write down just in the pull request on Multer to remember to update the documentation on the Express website, and I will see if it's easy and do a pull request or ping Rand or
Cool. And then I know you said something about alpha stuff, because I know you said you're pushing alpha versions up. I mean, that has the same kind of thing. I mean, being an edge module, don't particularly care. In fact, I see that the way you're tagging the alpha is how I had decided to tag them too, from just reading through the Semver, where I put dash alpha and then dot the incrementing number for each one. And I would say it's up to you whether or not I say it would be up to certainly the module on a case-by-case basis if they feel it's necessary to publish alphas, right? Obviously you felt like it was necessary, so that's fine. But publishing alphas itself aren't certainly a requirement in any way. Beta is the same way. And whether or not you want to progress from alpha to beta to RC or anything else in between before doing the major is certainly all up to you. Typically, at least with Express, that's what my thoughts were on it. is usually I would, if I feel like I need to, I would progress from alpha to beta to RC. And then ideally, if you do actually make an RC release, ideally the last RC should be exactly the same as gets published as the regular version, minus the metadata gets updated to not say RC anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and that's my only thoughts about at least those kind of things. So,
yeah, no, that sounds very good. That sounds exactly how I think it should be as well.
yeah, and you know, the only, at least the way NPM used to be, I'm not sure if it's changed now, but like what I would always do is when I publish to NPM is I would usually not bother with putting another tag because you can't, at least I don't know if you can anymore, but before you couldn't delete the tags, which is stupid. So like I would always actually just push up under the latest tag and then change the latest tag to point back to the non-alpha version. But then of course it updates the README. So actually I used to, I'm probably I'll still do that again. I would actually hack the NPM client to publish the README string of the actual thing I wanted on there, because it's stupid. I know that there's been a long-standing bug with there to make that not matter anymore. Like, instead of having like the package just have the README string in it to actually store all the different versions of the README, and then thus whatever the latest pointed to, they would just show that version of the README. So if you just changed the tag to point somewhere else, it would automatically update the README. I don't think that's been implemented yet though, because I subscribed at least to that ancient NPM bug on GitHub and have never seen much from it. Of course, it's so old they could have made a duplicate issue and resolved that, but who knows? But yeah, so
yeah, I have actually been pushing under the next tag, and if I go in now, it seems like it shows the documentation for the 1.x version properly. But yeah, I guess that's, as you said, maybe we can never remove this next tag then.
yeah, it's only a problem when you use the tag, because that's how they do their readmes today. Basically, is that if you push it up, if you do a publish under a tag, if that tag isn't latest, it won't actually update the README. But of course, that means you're going to make a tag. So if we do have to make a tag, I think Next is a good option for having a tag, because there's all kinds of different ways you can tag it. You can make each one be a different tag, and it just, like, people don't think about pushing, like, because then, like, once you start pushing the Next, right, then once you start, say like you make 2.0, right, then you push 2.1.0, you'll probably not even, like, Next will just probably continue to point to probably the last alpha that there was for 2, so that's, tags I feel like are kind of annoying in NPM personally, but it'd be cool if we could delete a tag, because then that would clean it up. But I don't think you can, because the reason I don't think you can is because people in their package.json, they can say like Multer, and then the version of Multer is the word next, as in you can make it the word. And of course that would break people. So I think that's why they don't do that. It also seems like a dangerous thing to do is to put a tag in your package.json. Same as putting a star, or the word latest is dangerous, but to each its own, I guess. But what else? But yeah, I would say if we do make a tag, I think Next is as good as name as anything. So, and then probably what we'll do is I would probably personally say push up to Next until the release, and then just ignore Next tag, and then the next time you need to use it, just go push up to that again. It's probably the easiest way to go about it at this point.
Yeah, I agree. And then from my limited research, that seems to be what people are doing as well. And I think that when you do npm install --save and write multer at next, you will actually still get the version saved into the package.json. So yeah, I think it's forward.
Yeah.
And also, it's the way I have been doing it, because the free alphas are indeed published to a tag name next. So
right, yeah. When you do the save thing, it does save the version rather than a tag name, which is awesome. And Yeah, I guess the discussion was really like I would say you could just use like the same tag name for all alphas that ever exist, like the word next, versus trying to do like 2.0 next, and then 3.0 next kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
That
that sounds good.
that can get annoying quick, I guess. But that's just my thoughts on it. Certainly, none of it is really you know gospel or anything, I guess. But keep it simple, I guess, is my thoughts.
Yeah, that sounds very good. Actually, I think I have one more thing regarding Milter. As it is now in that branch, I have dropped support for Node.js 0.10, mainly because I'm using promises heavily in the internals of the Milter code. So, I mean, 0.10 is end of life. I know that we have talked about it a bit before, but that was obviously before it turned end of life, I think. So I guess it would be nice to get some input on whether I should make an effort to still support 0.10 or if, yeah, how we want to move forward on that.
Yeah, so I did see that in the pull request a while ago, and I didn't have too much really comment about it. So to comment about at least my thoughts on it is that I would say, certainly the more versions you can support, the nicer it is. Being a module, people are going to try to use it. If there's a good use case to drop it rather than it's just annoying, that's all the better, right? So for example, you gave the promises example. That can be a good reason to actually drop it versus just saying, I don't want to bother it with it. Now, as far as like policy, and I'll talk once again. I'm going to refer only to say like my thoughts on edge modules, like policy. These are modules that aren't dependent within the org. Obviously, if something else in the org depends on that module, it should definitely have at the minimum whatever our own modules need. So if a module that supports 08 depends on it, it should probably not just willy-nilly support 08 without coordinating with the module above it to also do it. Otherwise, it becomes a mess. So that doesn't apply to edge modules. So as far as like edge modules go, like Multer and a lot of the other middleware and Express, the only real thing, in my opinion, on it is, certainly I personally like to strive to support as much as is feasible, just because, like I said, people will just, people are looking to use a module. So, it's hard for us to necessarily understand who's using what. It's nice to say that something's ELL, we don't want to support it. Unfortunately, people use that crap anyways. But I would say if there's any kind of policy, I would say, unless there's a very, very good reason, these days, I would say it should at least support back to 4 as the first, Node.js version after 12. So I would certainly question why a module within the org couldn't work on 4. Like it required like 5 or 6 or 7 or something. Further back than that, I don't, it's really, I would say, like I said, it's nice to have whatever people need. And I mean, it's really about, a lot of it's driven by your user base, the users who use that module, because that's how like some of the other modules, not necessarily within Express, that I've written have been driven by, where we didn't support a version and then people kept reporting bugs, and I would say it doesn't support that version, and they just won't stop, because it was installed on some OS that was popular to use. So I just supported it because it wasn't that difficult in the end. But sometimes it's driven by our users a little bit. But yeah, so the only real official thing I would say would be not. I would question why if it didn't support at least 4. If you were to say, man, I want to go back to as far down as I can. I would personally say these days, I probably wouldn't bother much supporting less than 010 anymore. The main reason is because there were a bunch of things introduced in 010, so that makes it a good target to be the minimum. For example, like new ways streams work and things like that. Makes it a good target to actually be a minimum that actually has a purpose of being a minimum rather than being arbitrary. And yeah, it is not support anymore, but it was only just recently went out of support, right? So like, for example, it certainly is feasible that people had just set up node and environments, back in, say, August. And maybe they're planning on getting it changed now, but of course they might have to migrate code and other things like that. So even though Node.js doesn't support it, and of course they're playing with their own support, some people also may not care, or maybe they're planning to get off but still working on it. And really, the whole Node.js we don't support anymore, I feel like, is more of a carrot than a stick, if that makes sense. So the stick is modules dropping support, really. The carrot is Node.js saying we're not going to release any more versions. Because certainly, even if Node.js says we're not going to release any versions of 10, people can just keep installing the latest 10 all they want. But if their favorite modules to stop working on it, that's going to kind of beat them off of using it, because it's going to be hard for them to get working things on it. So yeah, I mean, that's just my thoughts on there. So also, I guess one other thought that I wanted to talk about was, because you said 4.4 being promises, right? So I guess I had two more thoughts. So theoretically, one could say, well, for promises, you could support down to 012. I've never really seen personally wide adoption of 012, just because for a long time it was actually kind of felt like buggy compared to 010, and then by the time, then the whole IOJS thing happened, and then it got eventually released as 4, and that was actually fairly stable. A lot part work to IOJS fork stuff. So I like to kind of gloss over 012 personally. I mean, I don't know how great that is or not. But the other thought I was going to say was, for promises, there is a difference, of course, between promises exposed as your API versus promises that you're using internally. So you could, and I have a bunch of modules on NPM that do support a promise API externally, but support versions of Node that don't have promises. But that's only an option if you're going to, if you're not going to actually use promises internally. If you're going to use all callbacks internally, then that's an option. Also, you'd have to make your API promises or callbacks typically. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless anyways if your API is only promises. But that's just a thought there. It's not any kind of thing, but yeah, otherwise, I think that's the only thoughts that I had on that. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's only used internally, which makes it more interesting, because in the API it wouldn't really make sense to have promises anyway, since this is some middleware, and when we pass off to Express, everything will already be done. But I think that the promise actually helped me iron out a few bugs that had to do with, timing and streams and different things happening at the same time. It's kind of hard to get right with callbacks, which is what I noticed the last time around when I did the multi-version 1. So I think it has really helped, and it's I guess that it bringing in a promise polyfill or a promise module would probably make it work on 010. But I don't know if that's that will install another promise that is not native, which might mean that it's not as fast as the native V8 promises would be. But I guess it could load that conditionally, but it will still install a promise polyfill for all of users that are on a new version. I'm thinking and this is pure speculation since we don't have any numbers on it, but I'm guessing that people developing new stuff, which is, since this is going to be a new major release, it's probably going to be used by people actually developing stuff new. And I think that it's going to be more people with newer versions of Node, but of course we don't know that. But it would, if issues are being opened, it would be easy to release just a minor or a patch version that fixes compatibility with 010 as well. So yeah, that's just my thoughts.
Yep. And then my only follow-up thought to that specific thought there was the, because that's why it all depends. That's why it's all, it's hard to know, because that is a thought, right? My new major version is really only going to be mainly used by people who are using, more recent versions of Node. I certainly would not say that someone developing something new would probably be much less likely to use an old version of Node. The only real thought apart from that would be, of course, like, so say someone like has an application today, maybe it's built on Node 012, say. I'm just throwing out examples randomly here, just to illustrate what I'm talking about. And they're using, 1.x of your module. Maybe they just don't care about getting off Node 012, right? And obviously, that's why I say like the modules updating versus Node dropping support is the stick, because they might say, oh no, a new 2.0 of Multer is out. Well, we can't actually upgrade to this thing because our Node version's too old. So they essentially got another thing that they're gonna have to worry about, because what if Multer has like a security issue found, and it does apply to the 1x series? Then it's like, most likely for us, especially like some of those modules that are kind of simple, we're probably just not even going to care about updating an old version. So that kind of like, that's really the only real thing, is like, even people who do have an existing application, ideally, certainly if they can move to a new version, that's just one less thing to worry about. But so, I'm not saying that's anything to take into consideration, but that is just something to think about too when you think about, who's going to be using my module, right? Like ideally, the people who are using it today will actually upgrade to 2 and not just leave it at its old version, if it's possible for them to do so, especially when you change Node.js support. And I guess the only other thing I would say is definitely, when we're talking about changing Node.js support, like dropping a version of Node that's supported, it should definitely be probably a major version bump. That's how at least I interpret Semver, to be it's a major version bump.
Yeah, me too, definitely.
Supported version. So, but cool. Otherwise,
yeah, they're good
I think that, to summarize, I think that, if you feel like it's a good reason to not support below Node 4 for Multer being on the edge, I think that is a reasonable decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 0.12 would still be supported, but yeah, as you're saying, I think, and that's what I've seen from numbers also, is that more people are using 0.10 than 0.12. It kind of never got that wide adoption.
Yeah, and then, because of course, the other problem, and that's why I kind of gloss over 0.12 support. Typically, I just think of it as either supporting 06, 08, 010, or 4 or 6. That's kind of like how it comes across in my mind, at least, if I ever think about versions of support. And the reason I kind of gloss over 012 is because every chart that I've seen, it really shows that it never really took off that much. And so typically, and also they also ended technically, from Node.js, for the Caret, they ended support basically about the same time as each other. So I'm sure that, and it was also it's also, I know that I have some really large legacy apps. It was actually fairly difficult to migrate between 0.10 and 4, and it was and 0.12 to 4. So, and 0.10 to 12, not too difficult. So like, even then, anybody making the jump off of one of those are probably just going to at least jump to 4 in my mind, just because of the effort required anyways. So it doesn't, certainly, like I said, it's not too much. Wasn't that much effort to migrate from 0.10 to 12. But at that point, since they kind of like end of life at the same time, like what would be the purpose of even spending time to migrate from 10 to 12 anyways, since the reason you'd probably be migrating would be module support, or that it's not supported anymore directly. Both of those seem to be going the way of 4.x, as far as I can tell. So
yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. Well, Rand joined us here.
No, sorry I'm late.
That's no problem. I see it's still light out where you are.
Yep.
But yeah, so I mean, I think we've kind of like talked about the Multer topic a bit. So I wanted to, before we ran out of time or anything, get to I know the one that you listed, which was about the sugar methods.
Yeah. I mean, I commented on the PR that Yapa added, and I guess I mean, I have these sort of naive questions like, which methods are considered sugar methods? Is it everything in the API, or what? I mean, it doesn't really, his addition there doesn't address these sort of.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, so one of the things I actually thought, which was funny, because the title right now was called Sugar Methods.
Yeah.
But technically, our sugar consists of methods and properties. Like rec.ip, IP is not a method; it's just a property. You put an accessor on it.
Yeah.
So, it is more than just methods as far as like the technical name. But I also agree. I mean, it's certainly a valid point of like where that stops at. You know what I mean? Because certainly like Node.js provides its API and we enhance it. So, I think if we want to define on what's sugar and what's not, I think it might be reasonable to say the sugar is what is not from core. Could be the distinction that we make. So like, for example, res.write and res.end would be not considered sugar since they come from core, but res.send would be, since we're the ones who added it. And I would probably say like anything we add would just be sugar. That'd be an easy distinction, rather than saying like some of our things are not and some are, because the way I think about them usually are, everything that you can do with those methods and properties, you can do with Node Core. It's just maybe we either make it easier or we provide like a chainable API. Like, for example, like res.status code is a property you can set a status code in core.
Yeah.
We provide the res.status method, which really doesn't do much besides set the property. So it's really kind of like sugar in the fact that you could chain it with other, because it returns the res object from itself. So that way you could just chain it. But yeah, like to your point there, like if so, we should clearly list them. I agree. Obviously, they're listed in the API docs already, but we should definitely just call them out somewhere, right? Either if we're going to have an entire section dedicated to this sugar, it looks like the current proposal is a whole page. It should. If it's separate from the API docs, it should definitely either specifically list them out or explain how people know what is or what isn't a so-called sugar method.
Right.
So definitely, like, like Yapa said, I think it is kind of a rough draft,
Sure.
for sure. But there's all those things about I'm thinking about, especially documentation wise. So let's see. Are there any? Oh yeah, I was just reading through your list of questions in the thing as well. So I think I kind of touched on most of it. My thoughts.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll I mean, I guess I'll ask Yapa to add that to the page, or and I don't know. I mean, the other thing is, why would you want to do this? I mean, I understand somebody asked about it in another issue somewhere, but again, sort of naively, why would you want to do this?
Yes. So technically, so right now it's actually part of the API. So back from when TJ originally pretty much wrote it, it stuck around for a while because there is a reason it could be useful. One is because there's always the argument, well, you can put a middleware, right, that just replaces the method or property in a middleware, and that's a bad way to do it too.
Yeah.
Certainly, if you pre-declare it beforehand because you always want it, I mean, that's gonna technically probably be slightly more performant, I guess. And I guess it's a little bit of a more than one way to do it kind of a thing. But I think that is probably a secondary discussion we should probably think about is, when people want to say put some new helper globally or overwrite one of ours, probably maybe we should at least figure out, discuss or write down somewhere on the guide or something, what is the most appropriate way to do that? Is doing it in a middleware more appropriate somehow than doing it via these objects that are exposed, or vice versa, and probably also to figure out what the pros and cons of both are, because certainly if one does everything we need and there's no reason to have the other, slimming down an API of two ways to do something is always nice.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just more surface area to maintain otherwise, and more confusion for people of, well, what's the best way to do that, kind of a thing. So probably something we should probably open up an issue about, probably in the discussions repo, just to talk about those kind of things, because I didn't really, I've known about these properties, as someone pointed out, it's not documented super well, which is absolutely true. I mean, this is the same thing as any documentation, it's hard, documentation is hard to think about every single case ever, especially when you're doing it after it was written. So, I mean, it's just, in my opinion, it wasn't there just honestly because no one just really realized it wasn't there, so, but of course, now that, it brings it up to our minds, it's kind of like hey, maybe we should think about this. Is this, and especially when we document it, what is, obviously having it there, like I was saying with those other examples, explaining people when you would use it or when you not use it, is great. And of course, just coming up with those when to use and when not to use ourselves is almost like a exploration into our own API to say, maybe we don't need this thing here, or maybe we should do it that way, right? Because if we do get rid of it, say, then we would declare, and this is just hypothetical, just for, of course, anybody coming in. If we say we get rid of it, then hypothetically, we shouldn't be using it either, right? That means Express should, if the doing via middleware is the quote proper way, then Express should declare all of its sugar as a middleware and implicitly as the top, like it does today with the query parsing in X, for example. So really removing it is, twofold, right? We certainly, if we feel like it's good enough for us to use, clearly there must be some reason why someone else would use it. And that would, help us tell people like which one is the proper one to use. And if we determine that if we really think about it and there's no good reason, then we should just change it to the middleware method, because certainly the middleware method won't go away. I mean, you can't really make that go away. That's just something you can just do with code. So really at this point, the question is, does the prototype stuff even need to exist? And what is the purpose of it existing? Especially because that does drag Express's performance a little bit when it rewrites the prototype of the objects that come. And that's also the main issue with why we struggle a little bit with mock objects and things that are trying to mimic the Node Core API, because we'll just stomp over the prototype. There are ways to solve that where we inject our object into the middle of the chain, but that just adds more performance overhead. So certainly, I think that this, having this discussion will help us with that aspect too. So probably what we'll do is we'll probably make a discussion thread about this thing. Also give us time to think about it too between now and the next TC meeting. So, anything we are thinking of talking high bandwidth outside of the GitHub discussion, we'll be able to regroup on as well for that. But as far as the docs, we probably can skimp on necessarily adding that to the docs at this point, but then there's the other parts of the doc we talked about. So, and I saw Yappa here.
Yeah, looks like the schedule I got was late by 1 hour.
Yep, yeah, it's fine. And it's because I know we did that actually last time that we did it. So in my time, 23:30 UTC maps to 7:30 p.m. in daylight saving, but 6:30 p.m. Without daylight saving. So I totally, even though I knew that because we agreed to that before, I had totally forgotten that other meeting, which was just after daylight saving. So at least, so it's just like they do it Sunday morning, Saturday night here in the U.S. So that way, at least the minimum number of, at least less people will be late to work. So it's funny, just because it's, even if you have clocks these days that change automatically, you still kind of forget. So, but yep. So I mean, but yeah, otherwise that's, and you can always watch, what we talked about before, after. But yes, so we have hit an hour. So typically they're for an hour. I know that I probably need to jump off. So I don't know if talk or we'll just break here. We'll make those discussions and stuff.
Yeah. Let's break, but we'll tell Yappa we did discuss your PR to add a page about overriding sugar methods, and so Doug had some comments there in response to my latest question on the issue, and so you can listen to the video to catch up, and then we can just carry on in discussion in the issue, and yeah. I guess that's about it.
Yeah, sure. I'll listen to the video.
Okay. All right. So, and just to be clear, we want to continue doing the meetings at the 23:30 UTC. Does that time work for you, Doug, and everybody?
So both times work for me. So 23 UTC or 0:30 UTC. Both would work for me. So obviously, certainly 7:30 p.m. is nicer than 6:30 p.m. It just gives more buffer time between things in the day. But, really up to you. We don't want to necessarily move it and, yank everybody all around, of course, so. Yeah.
I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. I just, I was kind of taken off guard by, I forgot about the daylight savings thing too. So kind of, it was on my my work calendar wrong, and that's why I was late. but it's fine as far as I'm concerned. So
Yeah, it was very good for me as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
23:30, I think it works the best, at least for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny, the calendar stuff, because I think that usually when you make those recurring things, they assume that you want to keep it the same time in your local time.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, guys.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, guys.
All right.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.